and that there are all these ways that people will try to address their symptoms themselves. So that may become a little mojito before bed as a treat because you got through all those difficult meetings and submitting that report today. So you may double up on the rum content in that mojito at the end and your little mango margarita, right? And so that can spiral into a certain dependence on alcohol that people don't really realize is pretty unhealthy, especially in perimenopause, right? And then of course, for some people, there is a higher risk of depression and a major depressive episode during perimenopause, even if they've never had a major depressive episode ever in their life.
Menopause has long been tabooed and shrouded in secrecy, leaving many ashamed and embarrassed about seeking and extending support for this sacred rite of passage. Well, the spirit and mood have changed, and we're surrendering to curiosity, knowledge, and empowerment. In this podcast, I'm sharing my own experiences and point of view, peeking into the lifestyles and rituals of people experiencing menopause, and tapping into experts for their take on the pausal phase. This is for you if you are one of the millions of people in the menopausal phase or want to support them. I'm Dixie Lincoln Nichols, health and well-being educator and founder. This is the Pause Pod. Today on the Pause Pod, I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Karinn Glover, a board-certified psychiatrist, health equity specialist, and transformative voice in workplace mental health and well-being. Dr. Glover brings over a decade of clinical and leadership experience rooted in both medicine and mindful human-centered approaches to mental health. With a rich background that spans corporate communications, clinical psychiatry, and consulting on wellness programs for professionals of color and beyond, she has dedicated her career to fostering psychological safety, equity, and thriving in both individual and organizations. As a trusted advisor, educator, and lecturer, Dr. Glover bridges clinical expertise with real-world application, helping teams and leaders cultivate healthier, more inclusive environments while empowering individuals to navigate life stressors with resilience and clarity. I'm honored to have her with me today to explore mindfulness, mental health equity, and the power of inner change in creating thriving lives. Dr. Karinn, it is a pleasure to have you join me on the Pause Pod. Thank you so much for saying yes. This is a conversation that needs to be had, needs to be amplified, and you are the person for it. I cannot wait to dive into it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm really happy to have this time with you.
You're welcome. And for listeners, I just want you to know a little bit of background. Dr. Karinn was on our panel at the Life in the Pause Festival. And can I tell you, the conversation was so juicy. It was so good. And we had, 50 minutes? And we just wanted to keep going on and on because mental health during this time and always, of course, is such an important subject. And there was so much we were unearthing during the conversation. I wanted to extend that and get a little bit more expansive in terms of how we can support our mental health. Hence the reason I'm so excited that you're here to share your expertise and your wisdom with us. Again, for the third time, thank you.
Thank you. This is so fun.
So let's dive into it. Tell us a bit about your background story, your origin story. How did you come to be a doctor, a psychiatrist, a mental health advocate? Where did you begin this journey?
Sure. So I am an African American woman descended from folks who were trafficked. You said go back, so I'm gonna go back, right? Descended from
Yes.
Africans from probably the west coast of the continent, most likely Sierra Leone, Liberia, based on my mom's side of the family and their cuisine. They're Gullah Geechee people from the Sea Islands of South Carolina. So shout to all of those ancestors who were trafficked to grow rice and cotton here in the United States. They were skilled rice growers, and I give a shout to all of them. So
Yes.
essentially, they in the 1940s, along with millions of other African Americans, migrated from South Carolina to New York, specifically Harlem, where my parents were raised. My father's side of the family is from Mississippi and Georgia. And so my parents met in Harlem. They fell in love in Harlem and then raised me and my two older brothers in the Bronx and in Westchester and White Plains specifically. And so I grew up. My mom is a retired public school history teacher. My dad is a retired public health leader, and he worked for New York City Department of Health, and he is also a very, very gifted musician. So I was raised with this understanding of where history and art and culture uh, become medicine, essentially, how they impact our health, how
Mm.
knowing your history, how understanding your culture can enhance your health,
Mhm.
and when it is taken away from you, how that can negatively impact your health, and not just your physical health, right? I'm also talking about your mental health.
Right. Oh, I love how you took us all the way back and gave us a really beautiful picture of where you truly came from. And the fact that your parents were both advocates for education, mental health, and your
Yes,
dad is a skilled musician. So creativity runs in the family, obviously, because
absolutely.
creativity enhances mental health. And let's talk about how
Yes.
music and sound
Look.
amplifies and optimizes mental health. So that's what you grew up in the midst of.
Yes. Yes.
Love that. So let's talk a little bit about career and transition. So you grew up with this family that's steeped in education and the arts, marrying the two. And at some point, you had a career with Essence Magazine. Tell us how that happened. And then how did you manage to transition from Essence Magazine to becoming a board certified psychiatrist?
So it happened like this. I My mom showed me a letter that I had written her when I was like 11. It was like a little love note, like, "Dear mommy, I love you, and
Aw.
I have been thinking about what I want to be when I grow up, and
Hmm.
I am thinking about being a diplomat." And because we had already been to West Africa, so my mother, in the course of her teaching activities at a public high school in Westchester County, specifically Woodlands High School, she taught African studies, and she founded a nonprofit
Mm.
called the Africa Study Group. And she and her students would fundraise to go on 10-day trips to Africa, various
Mm.
parts of Africa, right? And so, like, what an
Love
amazing,
that.
right? Like, just let's just sit with that for a second. That here's this
Mhm.
working mother of three who is married and thinks to
Wow.
herself, I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to start a nonprofit and get these children to West Africa, to various parts of the continent,
Mm.
so that they are always aware of that. Yes, they are American, but they are also African. So my mother had that vision, and
Mm.
I grew up watching that. And so I wrote to her in this like little letter that, I might have left on her pillow or something, just saying, I think I might want to be a diplomat, because we had seen, gone to the embassy when we were in
Right.
different countries. And I got to see that there's this wonderful way you can represent where you come from, and have this outpost and welcome groups like us. Great. But I also said, I love listening to people and I like helping them with their problems. So I think I
Mm.
might want to be a therapist. So, because I think I had asked my mother, what kind of job can you have where you listen to people and help them? And she said, that's a therapist. So I think I had said that. But then I recall saying that to my mother, and her saying, well, if you're going to be a therapist, maybe be a doctor. be a psychiatrist, right? Because my mom, she's Capricorn, right? So you
Mhm,
just,
mhm.
she's
Go
always
deep.
she's gonna listen to your dream. She's gonna listen to your dream, and then
Love
she's
it.
gonna tell you to raise it up a notch, or enhance it,
Mm,
or intensify it in some
mm,
way. So that was sort of in my mind from a
right.
very young age, and I went to Howard, where I chose to be a history major because I knew that I could like write history papers in my sleep. And I knew that that would enable me to also enjoy life because I had been in private, all girls, very intense schooling my
Mm.
whole life. And I really wanted to enjoy my Howard University
Of
experience.
course.
So I chose history as my major and Spanish as my minor because I'm always very good with languages. And it was really at Howard that, I looked at my peers who were pre-med and they were working extremely hard. And I was like, you know what, that's not for me at this point. I just came out of a 12-year bid in private school, working my behind off. So I graduated with those degrees. And then I knew that I always liked writing. And even when I had to write one of those interminably long history papers, but I still enjoyed the process of taking my thoughts and distilling them down into really essential facts that people could use to understand themselves better, understand history better. Fine. So I knew I wanted to write. And I come from a community, thankfully, of middle class Black and brown people. And so we were always well connected
Mm,
to other students my mother had taught. So she had former students who went on to work in publishing, one of whom worked at Essence, another one. So that was Corliss Hill, who was on staff at Essence. And then there was Tracy Kimball, who worked at Elle Magazine, and she now works in TV and film. So I looked at these women, young women, and I thought to myself, I want to write. So I reached out to them, and Corliss was like, I'm at Essence, happy to help. So I got a job at Essence as
mm,
an assistant on their 25th anniversary book, coffee table book project.
yeah.
And that was in 1994, 95 that I worked there. And then after that, I had a corporate job at Verizon because I knew, my parents, let's be honest, my mother, Team Capricorn, she was like, look, you can have all these little editorial assistant jobs, but you got rent to pay.
Hmm.
And me and your father want to retire one day. And we've been paying off your private school for a very long time. So you're going to need to get a higher paying job. So I got this job as an account executive at Verizon. I used to work in the World Trade Center. And I very distinctly remember in like 1995, 96, I think I was working there. And I thought to myself, like, this isn't it for me either.
Mhm,
I'm
mm.
making the money that my mother told me I should make. And I enjoy having nice things, but I also recognize this is not it for me. So I was in my mid to late 20s, and I started taking pre med classes at night. And then I
Mm.
went full time for my pre med classes. And then I applied to med school with
Wow.
the sense of like my inner 11-year-old was still just like I want to be a therapist, I want to be a psychiatrist, I love learning about the human body. I had no idea this stuff was so completely fascinating. And again,
Mm,
this also ties into my father working in public health for so many years,
mm,
and seeing the ways that he was adjacent to the medical profession and very necessary. And so I always felt like I had seen medicine and health from a macro perspective, from a 3,000-foot view, but I
mhm.
really wanted to understand the human
Right.
body and behavior from a molecular perspective, if you will,
Got
if
it.
I were able to
Mhm.
drill it down to the individual.
Got it.
That's a
Got it.
long explanation,
Oh,
but
no, but that's good.
that's
We are
that's really
very
it.
clear. You painted the picture for us, and that's going to lead me into my next question. So, you got into the molecular level of it. You understand now what it's all about. You got really up close and personal, and you are now a board certified psychiatrist. And in your practice, you integrate mindfulness based on the methods that you practice. What specific mental health challenges do you most frequently see in women who are in perimenopause and menopause? And I ask that because I know that in your practice, there is a focus on people who are experiencing perimenopause and menopause. And even before you share that, what made you decide to focus on people who were experiencing the menopausal transition?
Look, so the short answer is going through perimenopause myself. Frankly,
Your own
I had
experience.
treated women. Yeah, I mean, I had treated women in perimenopause, and so seen the medications that their primary care doctors would prescribe
Right.
for their symptoms. For example, gabapentin for their vasomotor symptoms or their hot flashes. And I saw that they often had chronic pain, so they were on Cymbalta, duloxetine for their chronic pain, diagnosed as fibromyalgia quite often. And
Mm.
I always wondered, like, what is going on there? And then I started to go through perimenopause myself, and I saw doctor after doctor, and either I got, when I asked about my symptoms, I either got, tisk, tisk, tisk. Isn't it the worst? It's awful. Yeah.
Mm.
And it goes on for 10 years.
Mm.
Good
Ah,
luck, girl. Bye. Right. I got and I had this team of wonderful women doctors who I
wow.
thought would have relief for me, but they didn't. Often the only relief they would offer was, we can't do anything. You could try this medication or that medication for your hot flashes, but all the meds I knew. And I knew I didn't want to deal with some of the potential side effects that could happen. So it really started me on a path to understanding my own perimenopause, talking with my mom about her experiences with fibroids and her
Mm.
experiences with a hysterectomy where they took her ovaries at the age of 42
Wow.
because, yeah, she had terrible fibroids. So they gave her a hysterectomy. She went in for a hysterectomy, and they told her, the doctor, I remember him, he said, "You don't need your ovaries. You're done having kids, so let's just take all those out too." And then she went into surgical menopause, which was so severe and so frightening. So I knew, as I went through my own perimenopause, I knew I didn't want anything like what I was going through for anybody, let alone what my mom went through. So that's how I ended up here. And from talking with people and reading and realizing there actually are answers out there
Yeah.
for some things, but that
Yeah.
so few doctors are educated about them, that there is actual harm being done just by our lack of knowledge.
Wow. I mean, how thoughtless for your mother to have heard from a doctor that you don't need your ovaries anymore. That triggered me. And it triggered me because I had a similar experience with my OBGYN, who was a woman. I was going to do a partial hysterectomy because of the fibroids. And I had to go in 2 days prior to the surgery for a consult. And I said to her, "Oh, I'm a bit nervous, as is expected. I'm about to remove a part of me that's been there since I was born." And she said, "Oh, you know what? I don't know why women are so attached to their uterus, especially when they're not having any more children." That drove me out of her office, and I never had the hysterectomy. And, I went on my own path as well, but I don't want to go into it. But I totally understand how your mom must have felt being told something like that by her doctor, someone who's supposed to care, even if you don't plan on having any more children, to say something like that. And I think that's what a lot of women are running away from, the callousness that so many of them experience in doctors' offices. They want soft spaces to land on. And I say that because I hear the kids saying that. The younger people, the millennials and the Gen Zs are saying, we want a safe space to land. And I feel like Women do need safe spaces to land when they go into these doctors' offices and are faced with these life altering changes that they possibly have to make. And so now you recognize that this is a problem. This is not how I want to see women treated. I want to do something different. I want to do something better. I just don't want to be medicated when I'm told that this is what I'm experiencing. How are you approaching the menopause conversation and even solutions to symptoms, whether it be mental health symptoms or physical symptoms? How are you approaching that with your clients and your patients, I should
Yeah,
say?
yeah. Yeah, I approach it, I think, through education first,
Right, right.
because I really want to give my patients as many resources as they can tolerate, frankly,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Because there's so much information out there, and I want to connect them with either social media influencers who I trust,
Mm-hmm.
or the right information from the NIH or from National Institutes of Health or from any kind of organization that or an institution that I trust, or the Menopause Society. So I really want people to feel educated first. I want to have as much dialogue as they want to have, and then from there collaborate on decision making now that
Mm.
they are informed about what's happening. And so usually it, people come to me with an amazing kind of urgency where they're like, yeah, thanks for the resources. Make me sleep. I want to sleep. And, and I'm the I'm the pill lady for some people, right? Because
Oh,
some people
okay.
do not want to go on a journey with their perimenopause. They're like, I just want to sleep. I'm still
Mm.
raising these kids and I have a job. I have a long commute. I want to be awake. So sometimes the conversation is just about that. Sometimes the conversation is about, are you still enjoying sex? What can help you enjoy sex? How is your partner reacting to your perimenopause? Did you ever talk to anybody in your family about your perimenopause? So some
Mm.
of it is like, what kind of culture do you come from? What kind of dialogue have you had around this? Is it embarrassing for you? So there's that. And then there is, how is your mental health? Are you able
Yeah.
to sleep? What's the insomnia situation looking like? Are you getting up multiple times to go use the bathroom because your bladder is acting up through the night?
Mm.
So we have some of those quality of life discussions as well.
Got it. I love that. It's deeper. It's not just about, I'll give you the medication and you go to sleep. It's what's causing you to not sleep. Let's talk about that. Have the conversation. You mentioned sometimes you're the pill lady for some people. Let's talk a bit about the dependency that some people may have that goes past just needing the pill to sleep, but needing the pill to exist, to live. And I feel like that's not a conversation that I'm hearing enough about when it comes to women during perimenopause and menopause. The psychoses, the substance abuse conversation during menopause. What are you seeing in the practice, and what are your ways for helping women navigate these issues that they may be having during this time? Because it's a difficult time for women, very difficult.
Very, very difficult for some.
Yeah.
The overwhelm that can happen during perimenopause, I think, is not fully acknowledged by most medical professionals.
Hmm.
Because to go from being, say, a 35-year-old, cute, juicy, enjoying life, traveling with your
Hmm.
homegirls, and to go from that way of being to gradually developing joint pain that doesn't really make sense, and the difficulty with sleep that doesn't make sense, and then vaginal dryness and complete loss of libido for some people. They they don't they being medical professionals don't really talk about how these compound losses can really, really impact somebody's well-being,
Yes.
right? And so, and that there are all these ways that people will try to address their symptoms themselves. So that may become a little mojito before bed as a treat because you got through all those difficult meetings and submitting that
Mm-hmm.
report today. So you may double up on the rum content in that mojito at the end and your little mango margarita, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that can spiral into a certain dependence on alcohol that people don't really realize is pretty unhealthy, especially in perimenopause, right?
Yes.
And then of course, for some people, there is a higher risk of depression and a major depressive episode during perimenopause, even if they've never had a major depressive episode ever in their life, right? So somebody can go from having never had depression to then meeting the criteria for major depressive disorder and not really realize how they got there.
Mm.
So there's that, right? And then recognizing also that with the sleep alterations that happen in perimenopause, that there are over-the-counter pills like Benadryl, for example. And so there's so many ways that you can sort of fix it on your own and quickly, that the temptation, I'm sure, is to like, let me just manage this, so that I can just do what needs to get done. Never mind that there's an entire syndrome happening in my body.
Mm-hmm. And these are the behaviors that can lead to the dependency. That can also lead to exacerbating psychoses because they are unrecognized. And by trying to treat self, then the symptoms, like you said, are compounded and can be dangerous later on. So, what are some of the
Yeah.
things that women need to look out for in terms of identifying these habits that can be dangerous later down the road?
Sure. So I want to sort of double click on the word psychosis because it's a very unique thing. It's
Mhm.
not like every person going through perimenopause is going to end up with a psychotic episode.
Right.
It really means that for the folks who have had a psychotic illness in the past, and by psychotic illness, I mean either schizophrenia or for some people, schizoaffective disorder, which is very much like bipolar
Mhm.
disorder, and for folks who have had bipolar disorder and folks who have had depression with psychotic features. And by psychosis, I mean hearing things that nobody else can hear, seeing things that nobody else can see,
Mhm.
and also perhaps a level of paranoia or what we
Right.
call thought disorder, meaning that the thoughts are no longer coherent when all of those things happen at the same time. And we know that like reality testing, asking, checking in about reality, the things that we all agree that are real, and the person is still kind of like, no, I actually do believe there's cameras in every corner of this room, or I actually do believe
Mhm.
that the person at the bank who I made eye contact with was actually a spy sent here by the CIA, right? Though it's those
Right.
kinds of
Right.
patterns of thinking and the inability to question it, that's where psychosis comes in.
Got it.
That's what psychosis looks like, and that can be a part of depression or bipolar disorder, and can be associated even with early onset dementia, unfortunately, as well. So it's very, very uncommon that perimenopause makes a person psychotic.
Right.
But if they have had a history of a major illness, like a major depressive episode with psychotic features, bipolar, schizoaffective disorder, it may pop up again.
Got it. So it's something worth paying attention to, especially for those who've had a history of
Yeah.
psychotic illness.
Mhm.
This is super important because you hear so many women talk about the fact that they've been diagnosed bipolar or have been diagnosed with depression. Then we have perimenopause and menopause, and no one's really saying, hey, let me pull you aside and talk to you about some of the things that you need to be mindful about. So I think we can have a whole conversation about just this alone and
Yes.
all of the things that women need to be mindful about because the body is changing in so many ways. Now, on a
Yes.
molecular level, what is happening that causes this to possibly exacerbate?
Sure. So A lot of things are happening, and I don't know that they're that amazingly well understood. But
Right.
among the things that are happening, as the brain is losing some of its estrogen supply, right? That there's just not as much circulating estrogen in the blood, not as much progesterone circulating in the blood, not as much testosterone circulating in the blood because of perimenopause. The brain responds in a few ways. It starts to change sleep cycles and sleep architecture. So people may develop restless legs, they may develop sleep apnea, right? Because the tissues around the throat, as they may gain weight in perimenopause, the tissues around the throat and the mouth start to become a little more fleshy, and they may collapse as we're breathing in our sleep, and then we end up snoring like a bear, and maybe also choking and coughing in our sleep because, again, the airway is not patent, as we say. The airway starts to constrict as we age and have less estrogen. And so what is the effect of that on the brain? The brain, as we sleep and as we rest, it starts to do things like consolidate our memory. It starts to do things like get rid of toxins and sort of clear some of the chemicals that accumulate during the day. The long term effect can be that we start to become low in some of the biochemicals and neurotransmitters that are associated with feeling good. So
Mm.
there's a part of the brain, parts of the brain that are associated with making dopamine, that are associated with making norepinephrine and epinephrine, and it just kind of goes out of whack and out of
Mm.
proportion. And so then we're left here just in this like low dopamine state, which is often correlated with feeling depressed, this low serotonin state, because a lot of those compounds are related. They're made along similar pathways. And then the receptors in our brain and throughout our body start to change their density. So because the body's like, well, what am I making all these dopamine receptors for? She's not getting enough dopamine anyway. Let's conserve
Mm.
energy. So the body, it starts to change its relationship to it's a whole thing.
Got
Where does
it.
that leave us? Out here just looking for some dopamine, out here looking for some norepinephrine, some of the right chemicals that we need in order to sleep well and stay
Got
asleep.
it.
And also missing out on the hormones and neurotransmitters that even help us feel good, serotonin particularly.
Whoa. So the changes, I mean, it is everything that's changing in the body with
Yes.
the decline of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. I mean, you just said something there and it just took me back and I just had a realization that I had restless leg syndrome. Since I was 32 years old now, I started getting it during pregnancy and then it kind of went away after I had my second
Yeah.
child and then it came back.
Yes.
Wow. So it was
Hormone shifts. Hormone shifts are
perimenopause.
strongly linked to RLS. That's right. And periodic
Oh,
limb movements.
yeah,
All that is
jerking,
often linked
jerky.
to, oh, yes.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So, folks, this is, you see, a lot of things are happening, a lot of things that we have to pay attention to in terms of the sensations of our bodies. Okay. So let's keep going. We now recognize that the loss of these precious hormones can lead to depression, as you explained. How many people do you see in your practice come in and talk about what they're actually experiencing? Because there is stigmas associated with mental health. And so people might be experiencing these feelings of depression and sadness, but because of the stigmas that are associated with mental health, people don't talk about it. What is your experience with stigma, taboo around mental health? And of course, especially as it pertains to menopause, another taboo stigma topic.
Man, I am somebody who really enjoys working with people at the margins.
Yeah.
So anything that happens in the hidden, in the dark, in the places where people are most ashamed, the places in their life and the times in their life when they want to go hide, I'm the person they end up seeing, right? So
Mm,
whether they want to or not sometimes, right? Like sometimes their
right.
whole entire family is like, if you do not go get yourself checked, it's a whole thing, right? So, in any event, one of the hardest things about things that are taboo is that they're
Mhm.
not spoken of. So that means people don't have a vocabulary for the things. So then they
Mhm.
come to me and they're like, I don't feel like myself. And I say, in what ways? And they go, I don't know. I just don't feel like myself. So then that means I have to offer, what times of day do you not feel like yourself? And they may
Mm.
go, all the time. Okay, what kinds of things did you used to be able to do that you didn't know how to do? So what I'm really trying to say is, people often don't have the words because they're raised without the words, right?
Right.
And so I have to offer up words. And sometimes I'll just say, make up a word. What does it sound like? Make
Mm.
up a draw me a picture. Do some choreography. I don't care. Let's just get it out so that I know what I'm working with. And
Right.
so from there, I find once I start helping people find the words, then their confidence sort of increases because they
Mhm.
know that they're in a space where what they're talking about is actually not so unusual, even, and that it's not necessarily worth being ashamed about, especially when it
Mm.
comes to the sexual changes in perimenopause. And for some people, perimenopause related depressive symptoms don't actually feel like sadness. Sometimes it feels like irritability.
Mm.
Sometimes it feels like I'm just suddenly intolerant of things that I used to tolerate, or I am lashing out at things that
Right.
I used to be silent about.
Yeah.
I've been silent all these years. It's going to have to come out some kind of way. And
Mhm.
it came out as a lash. So, all that to say, Dixie, that it involves finding the words.
Right.
It involves then also letting people know, like, you're not alone. Half the population goes through this
Right.
in one form or another, and normalizing it.
There you go. That's it, right? Because I think that's one of the reasons people are so ashamed of talking. And like you said, when there is shame and taboo involved, words aren't something that people can find to describe what they are experiencing. But once they recognize that there are other people, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I've got permission to talk about what I'm experiencing because it's not just me. And I'm really not all in my head about this. This is actually happening to me
Yeah.
and to millions of other people. I guess when people come into you, they feel safe to
Yeah.
say the thing that they may not
Yeah.
be wanting to say. Do you ever find that people know what is happening, but they just don't want to say it because they don't want to admit that maybe that's what's happening? But then when they get to you, they're like, okay, I can say it here in front of this person because she's a professional and she'll understand, whereas other people won't understand. Do you ever find that?
To some degree. So what I do find is that people don't want to talk about their sexual effects of perimenopause.
Right.
They have so much shame, and they have so much shame that they've actually buried those symptoms. So
Mm.
I have to start asking about, well, tell me a little bit about how your sex life has been over the past year. And
Mm.
they'll say, oof, this is hard. You really gonna go there, huh? And then I say, yeah,
Yes.
oh no, I care about, you're a whole person.
Yeah.
And sex is such an integral part of who you are. It's at the core of
Yeah.
most of us and our identity. So it's when I start asking some of those questions that people say, well, yeah, I haven't told anybody this.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I try not to think about it.
Right. Gotcha. So these women are experiencing all of these symptoms. They may talk about it or they may not talk about it. They may have a therapist or they may not have a therapist. And then they have to leave home where they feel safe and go into the workplace. Now, your work has included both clinical care and organizational consulting for workplace mental health. What are some emerging leadership or workplace practices that you believe support well aging? And I mean, you could include well aging as well as people in the menopausal transition, because I know it's not only people who are older who experience menopause. There are people who are in their 30s and their 20s who are experiencing menopause for different reasons. What are some practices you believe can support these folks in the workplace?
The first thing that occurs to me is always, how are the managers trained? So if a manager has an employee who is menstruating, does that manager know how to listen for a statement like, I have really awful menstrual cramps and I need to stay home today. I need to work from home. Does the manager know that as people enter perimenopause and say they have fibroids, for example, that their periods may be ridiculously painful and they may feel lightheaded, right? They may be bleeding a lot. So training the managers, I think, is very important, and having flexible work from home policies is really important to keeping folks with fibroids in the workforce, keeping folks who are menstruating in the workforce. So there's that. And then there are flexible, how do I say this? The flexible kinds of policies that enable people to have like FMLA if they need it for their own health, right? And maybe not necessarily to take care of a loved one, but to take care of their own health, to have flexible appointment times with doctors and things like that, and go get their imaging done if they need to. There's so much tweaking of doses that happens when people go on hormone therapy that means periodic visits, right? Let alone people having to go for pelvic floor therapy. So
Mhm.
I think some of those arrangements are actually really important for a benefits package. And then literally, what is the office temperature like? Does everybody have access to a fan at their desk? Right? If somebody has to get up to go to the bathroom a lot because they
Mhm.
have genitourinary symptoms, then is that a thing? Like, do they have to? I used to work for the telephone company, literally for Verizon, where sometimes in the call centers, people would have to raise their hand to go to the bathroom. What kind
Mhm.
of understanding is there for
Mhm.
menstruating people, for people in perimenopause? Okay,
Love that.
fine. And then for women in leadership, if they're having a hot flash during a meeting, for example, are things like that normalized so that if she starts fanning herself, can somebody else hand her an actual fan? Can we at least make sure we don't get too derailed by saying this, that nobody has to sit there and be embarrassed about it? Is there enough of a company culture around women
Mm.
that we can actually have experience a hot flash during a meeting and not feel like our position is going to be devalued?
That is so good. And I want to ask this follow up before I forget. How do we, as a culture, change the workplace culture to accommodate women? How do we do that? We know all the things you just said needs to happen, but how do we get it done?
So it happens through the benefits packages, I think. So in June, I spoke at the National Associations of Benefit Plan Managers,
Yeah.
Benefit and Insurance Professionals, NABIP, which is led by women.
Mm.
So I was on a panel and we were talking about workplace mental health, where it meets menopause and perimenopause. And so we had this beautiful discussion about policies around being out of the office. So it's not just are the managers educated and ready and open for discussions around women's health. Are there ERGs, employee resource groups, around
Mhm.
women, women's health, women's advancement? And are they clear about perimenopause and what they should what they should feel comfortable asking for? And then what are the benefits? Do they have access to some of these online uh, services that are built for people going through perimenopause and perhaps fertility issues and menopause? There's so many popping up that there's no reason that a company that is well funded would should turn down benefits like that for their employees.
I mean, it makes sense, right, that they shouldn't. But yet we see so many companies who are so resistant to having the conversations and to implementing the resources that are needed to help this population of people to feel seen and heard, valued and cared for, because there are so many women who go into the workplace feeling invincible and undervalued, especially as they navigate midlife. How do you think the women themselves who are experiencing this identity shift, how do you think they can contribute to their own well-being in the workplace? Like, what should they do?
Coalition and community are the first words that come to mind. Doing it alone can feel risky, I think, for women, unless you're, in the C suite, perhaps. But
Mhm.
I think building coalition, building community through the employee resource group. So, right, the other women's affinity group in the workplace, that I think can go a long way with engaging management and HR around benefits, and can also do a lot to educate managers. And then from there, as they build and build and build, they ask for more. Next thing you know,
Mhm.
they've got a contract with a women's healthcare company that's really going to look out through for them because they've got the specialization and the expertise to do it.
Got it. Community is the key. And I think, well, I'm finding that the more women talk about what's happening, the more comfortable they feel in the workplace. Because I remember 2 years ago when I created a whole curriculum on menopause in the workplace, and I reached out to someone local. She was the director of the company at the time, and she was like, "Oh no, that's not something that we can do here. We don't talk about stuff like that here." And then we got into having the conversation about how she handles menopause at home, and she said to me, "Oh well, it's nobody's business. When I have a hot flash, I just go and I turn up the AC, and I don't say anything to anybody." And I'm like, I'm on the other line, and I'm like, my mouth is fallen open because here she is just like bulldozing her way through this experience, not explaining anything to anybody in her household or in the workplace. And so that's 2 years ago. Since then, I've seen a lot more traction around women advocating for themselves in the workplace. And I'm hoping that the workplace can reciprocate that in the future going forward. What do you think is needed, though? I'm going to go a little bit higher than the workplace. What do you think is needed on the state level and maybe even the federal level, and the government level to really support women?
Yeah.
Because we know there are levels to this. What do we need?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. The first thing that comes to mind is conversations around it, like you said, leadership talking about it, and then also building the funding necessary to pay for the care. There's
Mhm.
no reason that somebody has to pay $500 to $1,500 for a visit with an expert when there are plenty of doctors, nurse practitioners, physician assistants who can do this work as well, right? So, have we trained the workforce, the mental health workforce, the physical health workforce to know about women's physical health, perimenopause in particular? So there's that. And then, of course, there's the public health messaging about it. We had public health messaging about SIDS. Remember, there was this whole back to
Oh,
sleep
yes.
campaign, right? We love a national campaign. We would love to see a national
Hmm.
campaign, tastefully done, of course,
Yes.
around hot flashes and getting people the kind of information they need so that they can be informed about their health, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially, as you know, and I'm sure you've talked about on your pod, the SWAN data that shows that exposure to vasomotor symptoms for just decades and decades, years and years and years.
Mhm.
Hopefully, people are not in perimenopause, having vasomotor symptoms for more than 1 decade. 1 decade is more than
Enough.
enough, but right? But that it is associated with their cardiovascular health, right? And so the idea to me on a federal level is start also giving funding to the people who are doing this research.
That's
There's
right.
so many questions that I think the medical community has about perimenopause and that our patients have about menopause and perimenopause that we cannot answer
That's right.
because the research hasn't been done.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree more. Show us the money the same way that you've shown men the money for Viagra and all of these
Hello.
other,
Hello.
male associated situations.
Look, I was reading the article in the New York Times about testosterone and how rigorous the FDA wants to be about testing testosterone in women, and they did none of that for testosterone in men. Right? They did
Nope.
so much less than what they think women need
Yeah.
when it comes to, like you said, quick.
Yeah.
I so where I went to medical school was actually where the science behind Viagra and Cialis and those medications came from, about
Mm,
the nitric oxide receptors in
right.
the blood vessels in the genitalia and around the heart and stuff like that.
Right.
So I remember the banners that were up around my medical school that were like, congratulations, Nobel Prize winning research on erections. And
Exactly.
come on,
Woman,
man.
silence. Nothing.
Silence. Hope it works
Nil.
out for you guys. Hope it works out. We found something
Exactly.
for the men, though.
But
Good luck,
now
girls.
what I'm noticing is, and I love the fact that men are engaging in the conversation. But what I'm also noticing, I'm just observing. And of course, women are talking about menopause. Men now are jumping in on the conversations, right? Whether it's husbands and male doctors or just onlookers, they all have opinions about menopause and women. But what I am not hearing from any of them is how simultaneously andropause is impacting a woman's health and well being, including her mental health. I'm like, it's not just us. We are
That's right.
all going through some things, right? And I made sure and I
That's right.
roped my husband in when I started going through menopause and I recognized that what it was. I said, oh, you're going through something similar too. It is not just me, and don't think I don't know. I see the signs just like you see the signs in me. Here's the literature. Go read. I say all that to say this: women are bombarded with all of their symptoms that they have to deal with. And then if they're in relationships with men who are going through their andropause at the same time, that's a lot to carry. It's a lot to navigate. How should women approach that aspect
Mhm.
of this situation? I don't know what else to call it, but a situation.
Yeah. I What comes to mind first is this conversation just about aging and our aging bodies,
Yeah.
right? And I know there are men out there regular, they walk among us who will acknowledge that their bodies are changing. They don't have as much stamina at the gym, or they notice that it's just much harder to lift the same thing that they used to lift. They have to put a lot more effort into their diet, right? So I think there are men who acknowledge that that's happening. What they are not necessarily keyed into is that it coincides with their female counterparts. And
Mm,
from there, right, because then there's a whole discussion about who are men attracted to in a society that glorifies youth.
right.
Does that then mean, well, because for some men, they're like, well, that's why I made all this money, is so you wouldn't have to pay attention to what my abs used to look like,
Right.
right? I made all this money so that you could be attracted to that,
Right.
and my gray here and there, but so that you don't expect me to look like what I looked like when I was 30.
Right.
And of course that also taps into power, right?
Yeah.
And for some
Yeah.
people, they believe their power comes from maybe different places than perhaps you or I think power
Mhm,
comes from.
mhm, mhm, mhm. And so it requires work on the relationship, right? This is a time to really deepen your relationship beyond something that's physical. It's a time to look at different aspects of the relationship and how we can bond in a much more meaningful
Yes.
way. Not that sex is not
Come
meaningful, it
on.
is,
Come
but
on.
let's
Yes.
connect
Yes.
in a deeper way, more empathetic,
Yes.
compassionate, loving, you know, however that
Maybe
is.
even maybe it's even softer love, right?
I
That
like
like,
that. Softer love.
yeah, right. We
I
don't
like
talk
that.
about that, and I
Yes.
wish we did as a society,
Talk to
right?
us
Because
about softer
we
love.
often look. I think about it often, what it looks like to me, right? These conversations we often have about women's libido tanking when they're in perimenopause, but that conversation leaves out the possibility that perhaps the libido hasn't tanked so much as it's changed. The appetite for the wham bam is not there, or even the tolerance for the wham bam is not there anymore. Maybe it's, look, I have a vision for how I would want to be loved. I don't know if there's a man out there who knows how to do it the way that I want. And maybe
Yeah.
it's a softer approach because, yeah, my whole vulva is changing. My clitoris is different. The sensations are different. I now perhaps, right, I'm just thinking of all the things that I've heard over the
Say it,
past few
girl.
years that I've been focusing on it, right? But it's like I may need vibration to get me somewhere, rather than just the one thing that used to work, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the idea, I think, that for partners being able to have a dialogue about how sensation has changed, maybe diminished, maybe changed, maybe intensified, but
Yeah.
being able to have a space for that and being able to say, I still want you, but I want you like this.
Hmm.
Could you be interested in trying that out with me?
I
Because
love
here's
that.
something I would really love to get into if you're open, right? And those are things that I think we are not exposed to. We're not taught to
Yes.
have some of those
Yes.
discussions, and yet they can be incredibly rewarding for physical intimacy and emotional intimacy.
Oh, I love that. I love that. You're so right when you said be open, because I feel like we're so locked into one way of being, and that one way of being is tied to sexuality. And I mean, some people are like, I have to have my sex. And of course, if that's what you want, and if you know HRT is for you, then HRT it is. But then for some people, they're like, I've had enough sex in my lifetime. I've had enough to last me my whole life. I don't, and I've heard women say this. It's not because
Yes.
they can't or their libido is low, it's because they don't feel the inclination to. There was this one person that I read about. She said she lost her libido and then she went on HRT and she got it back, only to realize that she didn't want to have the kind of sex that she thought she wanted to anymore. And but she tried it. So I feel like these are conversations that we can have. We can deepen and be more expansive about it without feeling like we have to throw something that we've been taught to value into the mix all of the time. Let's just kind of leave some things off to the side and explore something different. And if we come back to that, then we come back to that. So be it. But let's not leave anything off the table. And that brings me to the last thing that I want to talk about is the grief. We move through this process and we come out being, for some of us, completely different people. I know I am a completely different person than I was 2 years ago in the way I think, the way I move, the way I want to be, the way I show up, in my consciousness, in my critical thinking. Everything has changed. But there is grief attached to that. Talk to us about how we navigate this process when we're moving from this version of ourselves to this version of ourselves. How do we do that? Deep breath. I
There
like that.
is, yeah, I look,
Deep breath.
breath by breath, moment by
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Part of it, I think, is that the sense of loss happens in the context of so many other losses, that at this age and at this point in our lives, we know certain loved ones are passing, that our parents are getting older, and that there may be those kinds of losses as well. And then, of course, there are so many things to have questions about as far as our society, and right, because in any healthcare setting we're always thinking about the context for whatever is presenting itself in front of us. So when we think about the perimenopause and menopause and some of the things that are being lost or that we're letting go of or that are being taken from us,
Yeah.
we can't leave out the context. And then on top of that, there is the loss perhaps of the future that the person has been imagining all these years. Right. And so I think it was Kierkegaard, I'm not sure, but who said that, right, there's um, nothing more difficult than sort of losing the future that you've been imagining all these
Yes.
years.
Yes.
Right. And so for a lot of people, when they say, I had always imagined myself being a parent, and then recognizing that they're going through perimenopause and that they have a remarkable loss of fertility, then coming to terms with like losing that imagined future, losing those imagined children, losing that the kind of marriage that's centered around children, right? And recognizing, I think, and what I hope is the case for lots of us going through perimenopause, is that you can also, if you see the loss, then perhaps you can also see the space that's been opened up for something else. That if you see a future with no biological children, or no more biological children, what else might be opening itself up? Is that greater intimacy between you and your partner? A smaller family than you had imagined, maybe leaving time for you to actually pick up the creative endeavor that you had been putting on the back burner. You always wanted to learn how to knit, dance, to salsa, to travel here and there. Then maybe this is the space and the time that you can give yourself to explore some of that.
Yeah.
So I always, I think, want people to acknowledge their grief and then hopefully turn their thoughts as well to perhaps what may be opening itself up for you as well.
Possibilities, huh? Be open to the possibilities of what next. So it's kind of like reimagining what can
Hmm.
happen. And everything you said just now, I've been through because I felt like I was experiencing everything all at once. I closed my business. My daughter went off to university. I A pet died. There were deaths happening, and
Yes.
there was just so much grief. I was grieving who I was prior to entering menopause. There was just so much. So there was empty nesting and the whole 9 yards. I had to start envisioning my life in this new way. And let me tell you, I'm there now. Let me tell you, the vision has changed and I'm going with the flow.
I love that.
Thank you for sharing that. It's so important. Now, self care. What are 3 self care rituals that you practice that keeps you rooted and grounded and anchored in your life?
Oof. All right. Number one, rituals around sleep.
Ooh.
So I am somebody who very strongly believes in the wind down before bed. So turning down the lights, putting on soothing music, and really like disconnecting, if I can, disconnecting from social media, disconnecting from the electronics,
Hmm.
so that I can just start to prepare myself for sleep. So that's one ritual. And so that involves taking my nighttime supplements, my magnesium, and if I need a little bit of melatonin or a little boost for sleep, through gabapentin or something like that, I may go in that direction. And then from there, daily, I really try to make sure I've gotten at least 7,000 steps. So
Hmm.
walking is a daily, I'm not sure if it's a ritual, but it is a daily commitment. And then from there, doing something involving color and texture. So that may involve my knitting, my sewing, my crocheting. It may just involve playing with the pillows on the sofa to just look at color differently. It may involve looking at some of the images I've saved, uh, particularly of Tracy Ellis Ross's clothes, because I told you I was going to get to
I
fashion. I
know. And I was
told you
like,
that,
she's going to do it. She's
Dixie.
going to get in there.
You know I'm going to weave it in, Dixie, because
I'll
again,
weave it
when it
in.
comes to when it comes to grief and grieving the body that you
Yes.
used to have before perimenopause,
Yes.
and then figuring out like what is my body supposed to look like at this point,
Yes.
girl, what am I supposed to wear? What
Yes.
is gonna fit? I just
Yes.
put a bag full of clothes in the Goodwill. What am I supposed to be wearing now? Does
Yes.
everything have to have elastic at the top? Is that my future? So these
No.
are also so I think also, right, when it comes to grieving the body that you used to have before perimenopause, and then, figuring out, okay, look, if I don't ever get back to that body, how do I dress for what I have right now? For this pooch, for this extra little bit of arm
Yes.
circumference that wasn't there
Yes.
before. Girl, what am I
Yes.
going to do about this?
Yes.
And figuring out and reconciling, I still deserve to look gorgeous.
Yes.
I don't just deserve to be wearing soft sweats. Okay, this is what I'm wearing right now, my black dog t-shirt
Time
from
and
Martha's
place.
Vineyard. Right, exactly. But do I also not deserve a puff sleeve
That's
somewhere,
right.
a
That's
little
right.
something
Yes.
gilded to
Yes.
just remind me of the way that I felt before? Those are
Yeah.
some of the things
Yeah.
that I think are getting me through and keeping me grounded.
Oh, I love those self-care rituals. And I love that you wove in fashion in there because it's a whole conversation and podcast of its own that we really need to talk about how we can use fashion for self-care, our sense of style, whatever that is, however we want to put it together to enhance our mental health, even because I know that's one of the reasons I turn to my clothing, to the things that make me happy, my hats and whatever it is I have in my closet, because sometimes I throw something on and I step out into the world and I'm like, "Oh, girl, you're ready. Let's do this."
That's right. That's right.
It
That's
can make the
right.
difference. I love that as a self care ritual. And yes, walking is a ritual. They're all rituals, especially if you do them on a regular basis. So thank you so much for sharing. Okay, Dr. Karinn, last but not least, I have a rapid fire set of questions for you. One word that best describes how you define mental wellness right now. What's one daily ritual you can't live without?
Walking.
What do you believe midlife is teaching women most?
To let go of society's ridiculous and dumb expectations so that you can discover them and name them and adapt them to yourself.
All right. Fill in the blank. The pause is an invitation to.
Rediscover oneself and redefine oneself.
If you could give your 30-year-old self one loving reminder, what would it be?
Your body is really, really gorgeous. Don't be afraid to spend the money to adorn yourself even more.
Love it. Thank you. Love those. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Right.
Dick.
We can go on and on. There's so much to talk about here as it comes to mental health. I would love to have you come back and talk some more and expand the conversation because it's a conversation we don't ever need to let slide by. Our mental health is super important. So I hope you would agree to come back.
Absolutely. This is my pleasure.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell us how we can find you and stay connected with you on socials and all the places where you exist.
Sure. So I am on Instagram at Dr. Karinn. So that's DrKarinn on Instagram. And I have Facebook, but I don't check it very much, like probably twice a year. And I am on Twitter again. The entity formerly known as Twitter, now X, which I do not check at all unless I'm looking for alternate side of the street parking regulations updates. And my website is drkarinn.com. So it's drkarinn.com. And people can leave me there's an email submission form where people can submit communication, and I will usually write back within 24 to 48 hours. And yeah, I think and I'm on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be sure to drop all of those in the show notes. Again, thank you, Dr. Karinn, for coming on and sharing your wealth of wisdom. I know you have so much more to share with us, and you'll be back to share more. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Let's continue to menopause, and prosper. See you next time.
Thank you.